Welcome to another episode of our video series of the mechanics of human cognition.
It's good to be back.
It really is. That was some pretty dense modeling we got through last week.
It was intense. I'm ready for something a bit more, shall we say, foundational.
Well, I think we have it. We're jumping right into a question that sits underneath, well, pretty much everything. Psychology, philosophy, you name it.
Okay, let's hear it.
Is a life entirely free of belief even possible for a human being?
Right to the heart of it. You know, based on everything we understand about how the brain works, the short answer is just no, absolutely not.
Not a problem.
Our entire existence is built on it. Our memories, what we experience right now, how we even process data, it's all filtered through these structures of what you could call foundational belief. The Turkish term incitens captures it well.
I think that's a provocative way to start for a lot of people, especially those who really value science and empiricism. They see a very hard line between knowledge and belief.
They do, and that's a common misconception. The thing is, our source material and the wider cognitive consensus suggests that science itself, it operates on belief.
So even what we call knowledge is, at its core, a kind of belief.
It's a specific kind. You could call it a justified belief. And that distinction is everything.
Okay, let's unpack that. The basic function of the brain is to make assumptions, right? And those assumptions have to be rooted in belief.
That is exactly it. The brain, first and foremost, is a prediction engine. Its whole job is to guess what's going to happen next and then see if it was right.
It's a hypothesis tester.
Constantly.
Yeah.
Just can't afford to wait for 100% certainty before every single action. Think about it. If you had to consciously verify every single thing, you'd never get out of bed.
You'd be paralyzed. I mean, I just walked in here and sat on this chair. I didn't test its legs.
You didn't. You operated on a functional belief, one based on all your past experiences, that the chair would hold you up. It's not some deep emotional conviction.
No.
It's a rapid operational shortcut that makes life possible. Every time you drive through a green light, you're acting on the belief that the other drivers will stop for their red one. Our whole lives are built on these functional beliefs.
So if the brain is always making these educated guesses, these hypotheses, then the scientific method is really just a more formal, rigorous version of what our brains do naturally.
Precisely. A hypothesis is a tentative belief, a hunch. Scientists then just put that hunch through the ringer to test it, and if the evidence holds up again and again, it might become a theory.
And that's where we get to knowledge. Knowledge is just belief with really good justification.
That's the key. But it does raise a critical question, doesn't it? If it's all rooted in belief, doesn't that make science seem a bit fragile?
Yeah, where does verifiable truth fit in? How do we not just slide into total relativism where anything goes?
It's not fragile, it's iterative. The justification is the filter. The moment you remove that justification or find better evidence, that thing we call knowledge just, it instantly reverts to being an old belief.
Like the Earth being flat.
The classic example. For centuries, based on all the available data, that was a justified belief. It was knowledge. Then we got better data. The justification collapsed, and now it's just a historical curiosity.
But let's bring that to today. I mean, when I trust a climate model or a historical account of something I didn't witness, I'm not running experiments myself.
Of course not. You're placing your belief in the authority and the methodology of the source. Even as a fellow scientist, when you listen to me talk, you're largely accepting my statements because you trust my justification.
I'm trusting your credentials, the data you rely on.
Right. You haven't run the same fMRI scans. So belief, or maybe trust, is the absolute precondition for almost any transfer of knowledge.
Okay, so that reality, that belief is mandatory for our minds to even work. That seems to directly challenge this idea of a life without belief, an idea some people might associate with, say, atheism.
It does. And we have to be really precise here. To be without a not, to have no beliefs at all is, like we said, impossible for a functioning mind. But to follow atheism as an organized worldview, that's something different.
Because it becomes a system, an ideology.
Exactly. When you add that "atheism" suffix-like in communism or Islamism or even philosophical atheism, it signals a formulated, structured system of belief. It provides its own answers, its own premises for how to navigate the world.
And there's a philosophical trap there too, isn't there? Trying to prove a negative. If I say I believe there is no God, that statement itself is an act of faith.
It is. It's a profound logical constraint. Carl Sagan and others have pointed this out many times. The absence of proof is not proof of absence.
Right.
To logically prove something doesn't exist, you'd have to be everywhere in the universe at all times, past, present, and future, to verify its non-existence.
Which is impossible.
So believing in its non-existence is an article of faith. It's an accepted premise, not a verified fact.
So whether you believe in a higher power or you believe in the non-existence of one, you're still operating inside a mandatory belief system.
The architecture is the same, and that architecture doesn't just stay inside our skulls. It scales up to build entire societies.
We tend to think of religion in a very specific spiritual way.
We do, but we should broaden that out. Think of it as any mandatory code, any set of rules that lets a large group of people move forward together.
Any shared blueprint for cooperation, which is where modern ideologies come in to fill the gap left by traditional religion.
Exactly that. Take capitalism. It functions as a complete societal religion. It requires a collective belief in its core tenets, its own, you could say, commandments.
Like what? Constant growth.
Constant growth, the virtue of hard work, the absolute need to invest. These aren't laws of physics. They're rules we've all agreed to believe in so the system functions.
So who are the priests in that system? Economists? CEOs?
You could argue that. The scriptures are the financial news and economic textbooks. The rituals are the daily commute, the quarterly earnings call. And it's not just capitalism. Socialism, digitalism. They're all new rule sets, new belief systems.
Because humans are group animals, and we can't cooperate without some kind of shared story.
We can't. And those beliefs, they're the very first filter on reality. If you trace the cognitive process, it's pretty clear.
What's the sequence?
It's inferences, which are your beliefs, which then lead to how you evaluate data, which then generates an emotion, which finally leads to a behavior.
So if you change the initial belief, you change everything that follows.
The entire downstream outcome. And this isn't just theory. We see it work in practice every single day in therapy.
You're talking about something like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
CBT is the perfect empirical proof. It's built entirely on this principle.
How does that work then? Is it about changing the objective facts of what happened to someone?
Not at all. The objective facts are fixed. What CBT does is help a person change their mental story, the dysfunctional beliefs they've attached to those facts.
So instead of, I failed that presentation, so I'm a complete failure,
It becomes, I failed that presentation, which is a data point I can learn from. The moment you change that core belief, the crippling anxiety might become manageable disappointment. The behavior changes from avoidance to trying again. It proves we are creatures of our stories.
which also helps explain this persistent need we have for a bigger story, doesn't it? Even in a very secular scientific age, you see highly intelligent, successful people drawn to, well, systems that can seem irrational from the outside. New Age movements, Scientology.
It speaks directly to that deep, inescapable human need for meaning. Our brains, our senses, can only perceive a tiny sliver of reality. It's not enough to make sense of the sheer complexity of the universe or our own mortality.
We need a grand narrative.
We need a framework to fit the fragments into, something that gives us comfort and a sense of direction. For the individual inside that system, its internal function, the meaning it provides, is far more important than its external rationality.
So that really shifts the focus for anyone listening. The most important question isn't, is my belief objectively true?
The much more useful question is this belief functional for my life?
Does it help me grow? Or does it limit me?
Does it foster cooperation, or does it cause me to create enemies? A dysfunctional belief is one that limits your life and causes needless conflict. And that's an audit everyone should be running on their own beliefs constantly.
So if belief is mandatory, and science gives us our best data on how humans function optimally, maybe we can use science itself as the justification for a new functional belief system.
I think that's exactly the convergence we're starting to see. If you strip away all the cultural layers, you find that core biological truths and ancient wisdom are often saying the exact same thing. We can actually derive our factory settings for a good life directly from biology.
Okay, the sources laid out 5 of these. The first one is movement.
Yes, our nervous systems are built for constant ritualistic action. Biologically, movement regulates mood, lowers inflammation. It's essential. And what does every major tradition have? Daily prayers with specific postures, pilgrimage, meditative walking.
It's biologically necessary. The second one is eating less.
Which lines up perfectly with fasting, Lent, all forms of caloric restriction found in religion. We now know the science behind it. Autophagy, cellular repair, but the wisdom was there for millennia.
Number 3, genuine social relationships.
We're social mammals. Isolation is one of the biggest stressors our system can experience. Every belief system builds community, brotherhood, collective ritual. because our brains degrade without it.
Fourth is stress management, specifically for the biggest stressor of all, death and meaninglessness.
That's the ultimate function of a belief system. It provides a coherent narrative for the biggest existential questions, which calms the paralyzing fear of chaos.
And the final one, challenging one's limits, the struggle against our base instincts.
Right, we're wired for comfort and easy gratification. Pushing against that, striving for self-mastery.
Yeah.
That's the hardest work there is, and it's a core tenet everywhere because that's what drives actual growth.
So when you look at those 5 things, science and ancient tradition aren't in conflict. They're 2 different languages describing the same user manual for a human being.
They're converging on the same wisdom. The truth is, our minds are still, evolutionarily speaking, very young. We can't process the universe with pure knowledge alone. We need these belief systems to create meaning. The difference now is that we have the tools to audit and choose them based on function.
And that leads us to a final thought. If belief is a mandatory part of our cognitive hardware, then maybe the next great leap for our species won't be technological.
I suspect it'll be a leap in how we relate to this necessity. It will happen when we finally stop fighting over the specifics of the stories. The details of the creator, the exact mechanics of the market.
The real advancement is understanding the need itself.
It's understanding and respecting the universal human need for a narrative framework. The goal should be to focus on whether our shared stories are beneficial or destructive, rather than whose story is right. That's how we minimize conflict. You have to audit your own beliefs, of course. But the next step is to recognize that everyone else needs theirs too.